There are a few more things that we need to learn about classes. And so let's actually create a new class now. And as an example, we are going to use the bank account that we implemented before in the Ckass app. Remember that? So let's say class account. And then, as always, we need the constructor method. And here, each account should have the owner name. It should have a defined currency. And also, we want to pass in a PIN. And so let's say this.owner is owner, and the same for currency and the PIN. So we already know how to do all of this, right? And so now let's create a new account here. Let's say account 1. And so new account, and let's say that I am the owner, so Jonas. Then the currency is in euro, and the PIN, let's say, is this one. All right. So indeed, we have the 3 values that we passed into the constructor now inside of the object. But now, what about the movements array and maybe also the locale? So we want to start always with an empty array as the movements, and the locale we want to get from the navigator.language. So how should we do that? Should we add a new parameter like this? So movement, and then always pass in like an empty array in all the accounts that we create? Well, that would work. So let's actually see that. So movements should be equal to movements here as well. And so now, as you see, the movements is now this empty array. However, it doesn't make much sense to pass in this empty array into all the new accounts that we want to create, right? So we don't need this, and instead we can simply do this. And so this is something that we didn't do before, but of course we can create even more properties on any instance and properties that are not based on any inputs. And the same we can now do for the locale and set it to navigator.language, right? And so now all of that appears here as well. And in fact, we can even execute any code here in this constructor that we want. So let's say, thanks for opening an account. And then owner. And so when Jonas opens a new account, then he's basically greeted with this message here coming right from the constructor. All right. But now what about the deposits and withdrawals? So basically, what about our movements? Well, we could simply now go ahead and do this. So we can take account1.movements, and then if we wanted to do a deposit, we could push a value into this, let's say 250. And then when we wanted to withdraw something, we would simply push a negative value. And so if we then take a look at our account here, then of course we would see these movements right here in our array. However, it's not a good idea at all to do this. So instead of interacting with a property like this, it's a lot better to create methods that interact with these properties. And that is especially true for important properties such as these movements here. So this will for sure avoid bugs in the future as your application grows. So let's now actually create a deposit and a withdraw method here. So deposit, and then here the value that we want to deposit, and then this.movements.push the value that we pass into. And now the same for withdraw. So also a value, And so here we can now actually call this method, because it's actually going to work basically the same way. So this dot deposit, and so as you can see here, we can actually call other methods inside of a certain method. So in withdraw, we are calling this dot deposit. But of course, we still need to use the this keyword to be able to access this other method. And then here we pass in minus the value that we received in this function. So let's try this now. So instead of doing this, we now can do it in a much nicer way. So account1 dot deposit 250, and then account1 dot withdraw 140. And so indeed, our movements array looks just the same as before, but now we are actually using this public interface that we built here, right? So basically, these methods here are the interface to our objects, and we also call this API, remember? So we talked about this right at the beginning of this section. So again, let's actually write this here. So this is the public interface of our objects. And so, yeah, this is a lot better than having to manually manipulate these properties outside of the object as we did here. Also, this withdraw method here actually abstracts the fact that a withdrawal is basically a negative movement. So here, as we did it manually, we needed to pass in minus 140. But now, as we do a withdrawal, it's of course a lot more natural to write that simply 140 are going to be withdrawn. So what I'm trying to say is that this minus here is something that the user of this object shouldn't be caring about. And so now we actually abstracted that away right into this object, and in particular into this withdraw method. So just a very small abstraction here in this case, but it's still worth to notice. All right. Now, of course, still there is nothing stopping someone on our team from interacting with the movements array directly and potentially making mistakes and introducing bugs. So simply the fact that we have these methods doesn't make it impossible to still do this. And the same goes, for example, for the pin. So of course we can access the pin from outside of the account. So you see, but probably it shouldn't be accessible from outside of the class. But yeah, of course, right now it is accessible. And this is actually a very real and very important concern. So it's not just something theoretical that I'm telling you here. And the same, of course, goes for methods. So let's say we have a request loan method here for some value. And remember that this was also a functionality of the Bankist application. So we could make the approval of the loan based on some condition. And that condition could come from some other method. Let's say approve loan. Let's pass in a value here as well. And this one will simply always return true. So I don't want to implement any complex logic here now. But anyway, here we can now call this dot approve loan with the value. And so if the loan is approved, then this dot deposit of the value, and we can log something to the console. So loan approved or something like that. Okay. Now in the public interface, we basically only want this method here. So we want to be able to do this here basically, account1 dot request loan, let's say of 1,000. And so we see that the loan was approved and it was pushed into our array. But of course, we are also able to do this. So approve loan. And so This, of course, doesn't do anything, but in the real world, we should not even be allowed to access this kind of method. So this is kind of an internal method that only the request loan method should be able to use. And so the reason why I'm telling you all this is basically just to justify that we really need data encapsulation and data privacy. And we talked about these topics in the introductory lecture of this section, and so as always, you can go ahead and review that. But anyway, in the next video, we will finally start implementing data privacy and data encapsulation. So let's move on there right now.